Jim Sciutto in New York. We never imagined a week ago that we'd still be reporting today that a commercial airline was missing and nobody still has an idea where that plane is. But amazingly, that is exactly where we stand. What an enormous task to search this much of the planet now with urgency for something as relatively small as a passenger jet. Airplanes, boats, and satellites representing some 25 countries are now looking for it, considering every plausible theory about what happened to that Malaysia Airlines 777 could literally be anywhere on the earth right now. The United States Navy is helping the search. American authorities are putting the most weight on the scenario that the plane crashed into the ocean outside the reach of radar somewhere south of India. Airline security changed drastically after 9/11, but now, nearly 13 years later, what lessons have we really learned, and what can this missing MH370 tell us about those lessons? We have California Congressman Adam Schiff joining us now. He's a member of the House Intelligence Committee. Thank you very much for joining us, Congressman.
You bet.
Yeah, I think a point I want to get to, which I think it may be a concern of our viewers, I know it's a concern of mine, at least a question of mine. If 13 years after 9/11, a plane can, and this is the presumption, it's not proven yet, can be commandeered, despite all the security measures that have been put in place since 9/11, does that mean that there's a vulnerability here in the U.S. for something similar to happen, or for the many Americans who travel abroad on airlines like Malaysian Airlines and other foreign carriers? Is that a concern? Is it something, does it expose a vulnerability?
Well, I think it certainly exposes a vulnerability in terms of the fact that many countries don't check their manifest, don't check the identification of their passengers against the stolen passport database. So that's a huge vulnerability because it means you don't know who's flying on your plane. But I think that the vulnerabilities are much more for Americans traveling overseas than they are at home or on international flights to or from the United States. We put into process a whole set of overlapping protections in terms of our cockpit doors, in terms of air marshals, a better screening of not only passengers getting on the planes, but their luggage as well. So there's a multi-layered approach to our security at home that not everyone else uses around the world. And we're seeing some of that vulnerability, and that may have had nothing to do with the disappearance of this plane. That may have to do more with the pilots or crew. But even there, I think we scrutinize our pilots and crew to an extraordinary degree to make sure that we're as safe as possible. And I think relative to other methods of transportation, airline flights in the United States are a pretty safe way to go.
Well, that's good to hear. That's comforting to hear. You know, when we, and you and I talk about this periodically, when there's a new warning, a new bit of intelligence or chatter about another threat to planes. A couple months ago, we were talking about bombs brought on board in a newly designed shoe bomb or in toothpaste tubes, this kind of thing. When that happens, sometimes you'll see changes to security at U.S. airports. They might ban liquids or certain size things, this kind of thing. There was some new security in advance of the Sochi Olympics because there were concerns about attacks related there. Is this the kind of event that would lead to changes in security here, that passengers would notice longer lines, more rigorous checks of passport data, et cetera?
It's possible that it could lead us to even greater scrutiny of the crew of our aircraft if it turns out that that was the problem here. But most of the vulnerabilities that we have seen thus far are things that we have already taken action to correct in terms of making sure that people aren't traveling with stolen documents. So I don't think we're likely to see a lot of changes here at home. The hope may be that we see improved airline security around the world, as well as perhaps a better way of tracking aircraft. We'll be looking at some of those systems like the black box and trying to determine whether we need better safeguards so that pilots can't turn off the communications, so that perhaps the black boxes can transmit signals rather than having to find them under an ocean. So those kind of changes are possible, but I don't think you're likely to see them manifest in longer lines at the airport.
And I'm glad you brought up that point, because I've been getting a lot of questions over Twitter. Why is it that pilots are allowed to switch off those communication systems? And it's interesting you mentioned that as a possible change. Maybe that, you're saying, might change down the line.
There could be, I think, technological changes that airlines incorporate with the feedback of the NTSB that will make it easier to find aircraft, that would also make it easier to get information about what happened in the last minutes in a cockpit without having to try to retrieve a black box from 15,000 feet under the water. So those kind of changes could happen over time.
Okay. Well, thanks very much, Representative Adam Schiff, how this flight might affect us here at home. We appreciate your help today.